Heads of states, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I welcome you all to this high-level global climate action closing, where we conclude the exciting and invigorating discussions and negotiations from the preceding days with critical messages of how we can accelerate the momentum on climate action and translate political will into tangible projects that must achieve the global agendas set forth by the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. We all agree that the climate change clock is ticking, with an urgent need to move faster and further now, and enter into collaborative partnerships to make a much bigger, united impact. As a member of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on women economic empowerment, and an active representative of the private sector leading climate change, renewable energy, and women empowerment projects in Pakistan and globally, I would like to share with you all three key messages that I believe are critical in accelerating the momentum of SDGs and climate action, acting as that critical bridge between advocacy and the much-needed action. My first key message is to realize the importance of gender-responsive climate change strategies. There is enough evidence available to establish that achieving gender equality and elevating the role of women and girls in climate change policy and action is not only the fair thing to do, it also makes economic sense. Yet, we live in a world with absolute climate injustice, with women being the main victims of climate change hazards. We're all aware of how climate change aggravates the existing socioeconomic barriers that women face, especially in the developing world, from unequal land rights to the highest vulnerability ratios in the event of disasters, with 80% of the victims of most disasters being women and children. While we need to pledge today to enable women to climb up the ladder of policymaking and decision-making in the climate change sector and challenge the 12% representation that women hold in environmental ministries around the world, for me, just one simple realization is enough to approve the Gender Action Plan today and make gender-responsive climate change a top priority for all of us in this room and beyond. That fact is that as we speak, every minute, 4 deaths, primarily women and children, occur in the developing world, where women continue to burn biomass fuel indoors for cooking. This amounts to around 4 million deaths per year. Keeping the economic case aside, this fact alone is evidence enough that we need more women on the table, from the grassroots to the high-level decision-making immediately, to lead to inclusive and innovative climate change around the world. My second key message today is the essential call for action to the private sector to adapt climate change within core business sustainability strategies. With the extensive climate action frameworks and overarching strategy documents for negotiations and climate-responsive actions containing worldwide and economy-wide measures, I believe that the advocacy part has gained significant momentum. However, what we're critically missing out on is the action. We as citizens keep blaming the governments for not taking concrete climate-responsive actions, but we keep forgetting that all we need to come together to play a role in this momentum on an individual and institutional basis. Which brings me to the private sector, an emerging and key partner for the global development agenda, as it contributes for over 60% of GDP in most countries. Having led and experienced firsthand the deep interlinkage and multiple cross-cutting impact between the SDGs, climate change, and the private sector, I'm a firm believer that it is essential to bring the private sector leadership on the table for realizing efforts on climate action, SDGs, and the Paris Agreement. The private sector's role is critical for closing the financing gap for sustainable infrastructure, whereby the global demand for sustainable and new infrastructure needed in the face of climate change amounts to approximately $90 trillion, whereas the existing infrastructure stands at $50 trillion, with a gap of $40 trillion that only the private sector can come up with. In addition, we must act fast to mobilize the technical capabilities, the resource capacity, the innovative mindsets, and business diversity of the private sector to create bankable climate adaptation strategies. My third and final key message is to leave no one behind, with collaborative action that opens opportunities for all. We need to act faster and together as the climate change clock is ticking. Estimates suggest that cost for climate change action could balloon to $35 billion per year within the next 30 to 40 years. Some studies even show that we are wildly underestimating the future damages of climate change. I would like to share an important realization from the UN Secretary General's high-level panel, Women Economic Empowerment, that the issue of empowerment of women on all social, legal, and political grounds is an extremely complicated nexus, spread across countries, governments, and cultures. There is no silver bullet that can achieve all solutions with a magic wand. The same applies to climate action. For me, the success of the high-level panel, for which I thank the Secretary General, resides in the fact that today the recommendations we presented to the UN Secretary General in March 2017 are being transformed into tangible and transformative actions and projects across all member countries, including Pakistan. When I look back, the reason behind this success is bringing everyone on board and absolving the isolation we work in, with the governments, multilateral organizations, private sector, civil society, academia, and even the media working together as a one UN force. Having experienced the transformative action and resulting outcomes firsthand, simply with what all I've been able to achieve being a young businesswoman from Pakistan, by influencing the governments and the private sector to work on women empowerment and climate change, I would like to request the UN Secretary General to unite the governments, private sector leadership, climate action experts, and gender champions from diverse sectors together on one table and launch a collaborative call for action with the UN Secretary General's high-level panel for inclusive and innovative climate change action 2018. Thank you very much.